Good morning on this Sunday, September 8th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Shock, sadness, and anger after 4 people are killed in a shooting as police say a 14-year-old student opens fire at a Barrow County high school. Also, we are just 2 days away from the first presidential debate between former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. And the Atlanta City Council looks to limit the construction of those massive data centers. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Brian are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
It has been a horrific week in Georgia. There's just no other way to say it. 2 students and 2 teachers are no longer with us after police say a 14-year-old student opened fire at Appalachia High School in Barrow County. The victims are Mason Skirmerhorn and Christian Angulo, both 14 years old. Math teachers Richard Aspinwall and Christina Arami were also killed. Late Thursday night, we learned the shooter's father also facing charges related to the school shooting, including second-degree murder. Now, this is a political talk show, so I know we are going to talk about what can be done to prevent things like this from happening. Brian, let's start with you. The authorities clearly sending a message. If you give your kids access to a gun and they commit a crime, you too will be charged. The dad's charged with second-degree murder.
And I think this is a really strong message. We saw this happen in Michigan, where 2 parents in that Michigan school shooting have been now sent to prison. And I think this is a gun control measure of its own. Like, this is going to send a message to parents about having dangerous weapons in the house that can be accessed by children. In this particular case, it's outrageous because we knew this kid was troubled. When the FBI comes knocking on your door and you respond by giving your kid an AR-15 for Christmas, you have lost your ever-loving mind. So we've got to send a signal to the rest of the state that this is not going to be tolerated, that we do believe in the Second Amendment in this state, and we are going to defend that right. But with rights come responsibilities. And if you are a parent, the rules for you have got to be a little bit different. You have got to be responsible. You are responsible not just for your child, but in this case, the security of other children, including mine, by the way. So it's very personal. It's really hard to talk about. Theron and I were on live air yesterday, and he had to take over for me because I couldn't get through my sentence, because we all think about our own children in these scenarios. And we have said for so long, there but by the grace of God goes Georgia. This has happened in other parts of the country, but not here. And now it has come home, and this is so raw and it is so personal. And I can't speak for all Republicans, but I do know that Republicans take this issue seriously. They want solutions. And maybe later we can talk about the resource officers, the security measures that were in place because of budget items that Republicans put into the budget in the last 2 years.
Theron.
You know, Laura, this is a moment where I really take the political cap off and just really want to talk as a parent. And, you know, what B-Rod was referencing is that what got him a little choked up, and I'm getting a little choked up today, is that, you know, I think all the families, first and foremost, let me offer my condolences to those families who lost these 2 teachers and these 2 students. My heart goes out to them. But, you know, I think you hug your children a little longer. You talk to them a little longer at night. And I did that with my 4-year-old son as I sent him to school. And I know that there are so many other parents that would do that. We got to do something. This is terrible. And Phil, you may remember I said this on the show probably months ago when we talk about mass shootings. I think now we're up to 45 mass shootings in this country. You know, the stats can be played around with our school shootings combined. And this is just not the country that I want to live in because we have too many guns on the streets. Georgia is a place where you can have a gun, anyone can have it. And in this case, what really bothers me the most is that there were warning signs. There were indicators that showed that this household, this parenting style, giving a child a gun, I agree with B-Rob, for Christmas, an AR platform gun, is just irresponsible. And so what I want to say is this. I don't think there should be any limit or any restrictions or no measures we can't take as Georgians and especially our politicians to make sure that children's lives are saved at these schools, and we do not do enough to protect our teachers. And I want to say this. I want to give a shout out to these 2 resource officers
Absolutely.
who de-escalated the situation in the school. I don't know your names. I've been trying to find that information, but I want to thank you for stepping up and de-escalating this situation. But Laura, we got to tell the truth about what's going on in this country. We can have a robust debate about legislation and gun safety, but it all comes down to responsible gun ownership. But there's something going on in this country that I think is rooted in hatred. And it's predominantly being committed. And I want to ask Phil and Brian to help me. This is not an attack, and we don't have to talk about it on the show, but help me understand what is going on in these young people's minds. In some cases, not all, young white men's minds that lead them to take a gun and to go to a school, a sacred place in this country, and kill innocent lives. We've got to have a very honest conversation about that. And yes, it's mental illness, but it's something else going on.
Phil, I was reading some stats, and I read that there were more than 300 kids in Georgia so far this year treated at emergency rooms from gunshot wounds.
Well, that is a shocker, and yes, I join my colleagues with extending condolences to the victims' families. I think there is anger out there. We saw this during COVID. That did not help with isolation of a lot of these kids. And I think that, and we could probably talk about it later, I think that there is things the legislature can do that are responsible just to lock up these guns and have them safe. Yes, I'm glad what you've been talking about. I think parents ought to be charged. The father is being charged with second-degree murder. I think that is a strong message. But I do think, Theron, to your point, that this is a mental illness problem. And we've all talked about it on the show before. It is surprising and something that has to be fixed, where we had a problem in one school district with this incident, and yet the other school district did not know they had a troubled child there. I also join in saying thank goodness for the police resource officers. We need to get more and more in the schools. I know the legislature, Brian, you point this out. There's been a lot more money allocated, and we need to do that more for school safety officers. Cobb County, I think, has about 70, and they're armed. Other counties, though, don't have the money for that. So we've got to go into these more rural areas, kind of like what we saw this week. So I think that there's a combination of problems. There's anger, there's parental responsibility, and there's some things the legislature can do.
Melita.
Well, I join you all in the condolences to the families. But you know, the Republicans have been in charge in Georgia for 2 decades, and thoughts and prayers from politicians who have never offered proposals for real policy changes that prevent these kinds of tragedies, those thoughts and prayers are just as empty as the shell casings on a bloodied school floor. And until we do something, until both parties work across the aisle to adopt some common sense things like gun storage regulations, like red flag laws, and maybe even an assault weapon ban, we won't prevent these tragedies in the future. Maintaining the status quo by doing nothing is a policy choice. And calling school shootings a fact of life, that's a policy choice. And we don't have to accept school shootings, and the voters of this state need to make their elected officials aware of how deeply they feel about this, because that is the only way you promote change.
So let's talk about the political ramifications the school shooting will have here in Georgia. If suburban moms, like me, are a key voting population that could sway Georgia one way or another, what's the message, Brian? What's the message from Republicans?
The number one thing is we do care. And when people do say this is a fact of life, that is not the message. This is not a fact of life. We can stop this. And part of it is just being responsible. I will say on the Republican end, one thing that Democrats want to go to is basically keeping guns out of the hands of certain people. And the danger that many Republicans fear when it comes to a constitutional right is the government determining who gets a gun and who doesn't. To be able to say someone who's a political enemy has a mental illness as a way of taking their gun, that is something that is very real to people. But I know that's not what a mom or a dad wants to hear. I think we need to begin to focus on the fact that, as Phil said, $45,000 was put into budgets this year for every school to hire a resource officer. officer. The local districts do have to subsidize that to pay for the full price. Last year they put in $50,000 per school, and we saw technology used at Appalachia High School this week. I don't know if it was from that $50,000 budgeted last year, but that's exactly what it's intended for. So these are some practical things that are moving the ball forward. You know, we saw the Tennessee governor, who's Republican, act after that church school shooting there last year. I think you're going to see Republicans communicating. A lot of what voters want to hear is to know that we care about this, right? You don't have to have a magic wand, but people have to know you share their fear.
Well, you care, and yet you will take action. It can't be
Yes.
enough just to care.
No,
there has to be action. Darren?
Let me say this. Something is horribly wrong when a 14-year-old who has been identified as going through a crisis, right? Who has a family structure with two parents who are struggling and have been sort of cited as being a participant in some type of planning of shooting up a school. At that point, B-Rob, is that, look, it doesn't matter about what's in the budget. That's where you got to have law enforcement agencies work with the state and local government. And let me just say this thing about these resource officers. There is no reason right now in 2024 that we should not have a resource officer in every single school in Georgia. That is something that, to Melita's point, not just blaming Republicans, but they're in charge. Now, you tell me that the local schools are not taking the money or there's vacancies, then we need to stop what we're doing right now and make sure that we know what those vacancies are. But the problem I'm hearing is that who wants to really go now into a school, Lori? If you're in the training you have to go through, I mean, now you used to think that you can get shot in clubs or, you know, in road rage on the street. People are dying in schools, and when are we going to like really talk about what's happening? The last thing I would say is this: yes, we do care, but we got to call balls and strikes. There was 4 pieces of legislation that is at the legislature right now that we can do something about. And I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna call every single Republican and Democrat out. If this is not a top priority, going back into the legislative session, if this is not #1 on the governor's, lieutenant governor, speaker, minority leader, majority, if this is not #1 on your list, then shame on you. Because we have innocent lives that are being killed. And there's too many guns on the street. B-Rob and Phil, we gotta call it what it is. Yes, you wanna get them to protect yourselves, but no one is getting AR-15s to go out here and kill innocent children and teachers. And that's where I think the hatred and the mental illness comes in. And we need to have more funding, but we just got to be very truthful on this show about what's going on in this country. People are terrified.
I'll give 20 seconds each to you.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I don't disagree that we should make this a priority. I think it's a cheap shot just to go after Republicans. There are Republicans and Democrats who are sincere and who are trying to do some reform measures. Sadly, in the legislature, and all of us know this, they do jockeying and horse trading, and you can't get some good legislation done because the other side wants to block it, and both parties are to blame. But I do think that we've got to watch out for, to your point, Lori, to suburban people. I think public safety in the schools should be the priority.
Melita, quickly.
Well, the Republicans are in charge, a trifecta of power. But let's look at the Second Amendment.
Allocated
Let
money.
me finish. I'm
Go
talking.
ahead.
The Second Amendment, like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, was written by men, some of whom owned slaves, dipping quill pens in ink. And those men fired single-shot long-arm rifles. We need to look at gun policy for the kinds of guns we have now, for the society we have now.
All right, we will leave it there, folks. I know we'll be discussing this in the weeks and months ahead. So coming up, a big week on the presidential front as Harris and Trump meet up on the debate stage for the first time.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
For the first time, Vice President Kamala Harris will meet former President Donald Trump on the debate stage. Theron, to you first, what will you be watching for Tuesday night?
I think this debate is going to be set by the tone of the moderators, right? I mean, you see a lot of rules that we had in the past. Mics will be shut off, no audience. You see Trump already sort of saying that this is going to be rigged and they're going to cheat for Vice President Harris. And so I think the #1 goal of the Vice President is to make sure that she does not get distracted by Donald Trump. She knows that he's going to try to cut her off. You know that he's not going to come in there with a lot of substantive issues around driven by policy. And I think that she's going to really show the American people that she has a plan. And let me just remind folks as we sit here, the economy is getting better. Inflation is stabilizing. Home rates are being cut. and we're probably gonna have more cuts. You see people actually going, getting work, and healthcare issues are being discussed. And at a time where I think that, the debate is going to be so important, Lori, because it's less than 60 days, how she conducts herself and when she clapbacks on him, because she's gonna clap back on him. We're not gonna see what we saw with President Biden. You're gonna see her be very definitive in her positions, and I think that she'll come out on top on this debate.
Phil?
Well, it's laughable if she's going to use the message that the economy is doing great. I mean, if you look at all the pollsters, the economy is a huge issue. It's not going great. You've got the biggest credit card debt ever in modern history. People are going to have to pay this off. If you look there at the interest rates, young people can't buy a home right now. I could go on, and I know Trump is going to give great comparisons. I mean, look at the first thing that Harris rolled out, and I think Trump will emphasize this in the debate. She wanted socialistic price controls. Even the Washington Post, the New York Times, and even Ro Khanna and some of these pro-business Democrats said that's crazy. So she had to back that off. She's not telling what she's going to do. She's flip-flopping. She even says she wants to be secure on the border. Trump will have fun with that one.
All right, well, we'll have fun discussing it next week, I'm sure. Melita, I want to go to a topic you're very familiar with, the down ballot races here in Georgia. We don't have a U.S. Senate race. We don't have a governor's race. So this go around, so lots of money is pouring into some of these legislative districts where Democrats are really trying to chip away at the GOP majority.
They are, and there are races in the suburban ring around Georgia where Republicans hold seats that polling is showing even more than the several top targeted races. For example, President Pro Tem of the House, Jan Jones, her opponent, a female endorsed by my group, Win List, and other groups, is within shouting distance. Very close race. So when you have the combination of reproductive freedom and gun safety measures in front of voters with women candidates like those supported by Win List and other PACs, you have a chance of making some real inroads. And the more Democrats can carve away at the majority in the House and the Senate, the more negotiating room there is, the more incentive there is to negotiate on things like gun safety and reproductive freedom.
So, Brian, Governor Kemp and his allies have really deep pockets. Where are they spending the most money? And what do you think about Melita's take?
Well, Representative Shay Roberts from Sandy Springs area has got this pack of about $500,000. And what that shows is that there's a lot of divide in the Democratic caucus, actually, because she had to go and raise this money because the fundraiser and all the staff for the Democratic caucus quit. And so she's trying to fill the gap. I hope what Representative Roberts will do with that money is tell people in those districts about their record. They voted against ending no cash bail. They voted against making criminal illegal immigrants stay in jail until immigration officials can come get them. They voted against tougher penalties on rioters. So please use that money to tell people where you stand on these important public safety issues. Do me the favor, and I endorse Jan Jones.
Melita?
I'm sure you do, but there are some very real policy issues where Republicans have voted for, that Democrats voted against, that the voters side with where those Democrats stand.
Theron?
Look, I want to applaud Representative Shay Roberts for getting out here and doing this pack. And you're right, B-Rob, there are some serious concerns within the House Democratic caucus. The leadership there has failed. Those caucus members, many of whom are having to raise money on their own because you have a leader who has not been able to lead this caucus to make sure there's money in the coffers. And so you have other people in the leadership that have stepped up. But I would tell you this. I think that the demographics, and you've heard me say this now for over 10 years, are trending in our direction. And as long as they're educated to say a lot of what Melita just said, and these voters, I think with turnout being high, we're going to pick up some seats.
Quickly, Phil?
I'm looking at some of the DA races around the state. I thought it was interesting in Savannah that even Van Johnson, your friend, the Democrat mayor, is furious with his permissive DA and wants Republicans to vote for the Republican. It shows more divisions in the Democrat Party. Of course, in Athens, Clark County, they've got totally incompetent DA. I hope she's gone. And of course, Fani Willis is horrible.
All right, we'll wrap there. Up next, the city of Atlanta cracking down on the construction of new data centers.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
The Atlanta City Council has approved new ordinances aimed at regulating data centers within the city. The newly approved ordinances will prohibit the construction of data centers along the Beltline Trail Loop and within a half-mile of transit centers, including MARTA and bus stops. Phil.
Well, I think we need data centers, but it's all in where they're located, and the fact that they take a lot of electricity and water usage. I don't blame an urban area for being very concerned, so I think that's the right thing to do for the Atlanta area. I think there's some rural areas, though, where, and you got to watch what the contract says, too. I think some of these county commissioners could be bamboozled if they're not reading the fine print. But we do need data centers because our electric grid, we really need to expand it.
Theron?
Yeah, I agree with Phil on that. Look, we need data centers because of our modern digital infrastructure that is growing every single day. And so I want to applaud these two council members, Matt Westmoreland and Jason Dozier. I know that they met with other data centers. I actually represent a data center, for full disclosure. And so I think that at a time where data centers are needed, they're coming here as job creation, making sure that we're continuing to be this thriving city in the Southeast when it comes to attracting new businesses. Georgia Power is doing everything they can to make sure, as Phil mentioned, that the grid is protecting, and they're big customers of Georgia Power as well. But these data centers are actually going to continue to really work in concert with members of the council and make sure that when they go into these areas, these land owners who will sell to data centers, that there's that communications with the public. But ultimately, I think the city council did the right thing here, but ultimately I think the data centers are here, they're growing, and it's really, really good for this economy.
According to the AJC, the Georgia Public Service Commission has given the green light for Sandersville Railroad to use eminent domain to build a new rail spur in one of the state's poorest counties. In a unanimous vote, the commission approved the railroad's plan to seize parts of several properties to construct 4.5 miles of track near Sparta, about 100 miles east of Atlanta. Melita.
Well, this decision will now be appealed in the courts. And it does seem that the landowners have good reason for making this appeal because the eminent domain provisions are being perhaps wrongfully used in this case because the rail expansion is for private industry, private businesses, and they're taking land away from black families who've had this land in their family for more than 150 years. And it just seems like a wrongful use of the statute.
Eminent domain. Here we go, Brian.
But one thing, she mentioned that this is black families. This is, I think, the highest percentage black population county in the entire state. And it's also one of the poorest counties, one with very little tax base that needs to give social services and school services to the kids, the black kids who live there. So one thing that I want to keep in mind here is that this is economic development in a county that has had none in forever. Drive through there. It is a ghost town. I went through there 3 weeks ago. It's a desperate looking place. If it's able to create jobs, and these are $90,000 a year jobs, that's a great salary if you're living in Hancock County. That's good, and it puts tax revenues into a county that desperately needs it. Eminent domain gives me the willies a little bit, but in a case like this, the greater good must be considered, not just the narrow focus of some individual landowners.
But we all have to look at the price of economic development in this state. It used to be in Texas, they said drill, baby, drill. Now it's drill, baby, drill for the water, the precious water and the aquifers for certain kinds of businesses. And the wrongful use of statutes or polluting the air. There has to be a balance for the quality of life and what the price of more jobs would be for the greater good of everyone.
Phil, final word.
I do agree there has to be a balance for the greater good, and I think the Public Service Commission studied this. You know, this rail spur links it to a quarry, so they can make, what, $1.5 million in economic development just from that, and then other tenants will be coming in. To Brian's point, this is the poorest county in Georgia. We are looking at the bigger picture, and I commend the PSC.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned, folks.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
So today is 9/8, which also means it's 988 Day. I work with Georgia's Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, helping them to get the word out on 988, which is the suicide and crisis line. So if you or someone you know is struggling, having thoughts of suicide or dealing with addiction, you can call or text 988. All calls and texts are confidential. Really important on a week like this. Melita.
Well, last night Symphony Hall was filled to the rafters with people attending the book talk by Supreme Court Justice Kenjati Brown Jackson. It was a wonderful event, so my winners are all the people, including WABE and Rose Scott, who gave a great interview, who had anything to do with this. I also want to express my condolences to the family of Tally Sweat. She was a pioneer in civic involvement, and she and her husband, the late Dan Sweat, were the ultimate power couple and role models for many others.
Okay, Phil.
Well, a winner is Earl Rogers, the late Earl Rogers. Sadly, he passed away. He was a prominent lobbyist, first for the Chamber and then later for the Georgia Hospital Association, where he was president. And so condolences to the family. He was a winner. And my winner also is a Democrat down in Tift County. There was an election challenge. A lot of Democrats don't like election challenges. This one worked. The Democrat who lost got a conservative group, True the Vote. They won, and this Democrat thanks the conservative group for challenging it.
Who says Democrats and Republicans can't work together? Theron?
All right, my first winner is going to be Stephen Parker. He's a new AGM at MARTA. Also want to give a huge shout out to Alex Urban. He runs the Tour Championship. Great golf event this past weekend. Shout out to Scotty Scheffler. And also want to send my condolences to the family of Rich Homie Quan, an Atlanta rapper here that died this week. Very young, huge fan of his music and his work in the community.
And Brian.
Thank you for the 988 message. My winner is James Salzer, who retired after decades of service at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He was an expert on the state budget. His peer was the budget director only, and also just a darn good guy. So happy retirement to him. And then Tanner Good and Brandon King, the resource officers at Appalachia High School. God bless you.
Yes, heroes for sure. See you next week, everyone.